Hello, welcome to this episode of Biz First in Focus here on TV1. I am your host this evening, Shaheen Jurang-Party. Well, we had an interesting point in Sri Lanka's political sphere. We've had no confidence motion against Prime Minister, which was of course defeated by the United National Party and the United National Front. Now, a political situation ensued after that, where several SLP members defected from the government and now have proclaimed that they will function independently with the opposition. Now, the question is, while all of this is happening, what is happening to the other matters around the economic sector, the rural, the public welfare, so on and so forth. And to talk about these matters, we are joined by Emeritus Professor of Sociology of the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. Professor, thank you very much for joining us on the show this evening. Professor, we'll start easy. How do you see the current political system as? What do you think is wrong at the moment?
I do not see this as a sudden development. I see this as a process that has been underway for quite some time. In fact, the whole process started way back in 2015 when the first unity government was established, after the parliamentary elections in 2015. In fact, I was a bit skeptical about this whole notion of unity government, because I felt that it was not a government with a very clear focus, with a very clear agenda, and I saw that government as a scattered government. Because I, in fact, wrote an article around that time, which appeared in 2 newspapers, and I called it a scattered government because I did not see a very clear focus. As you know, 2015 elections brought into the picture situation where the people expected a government that would pursue certain national objectives against a backdrop of various issues that we experienced prior to that. For instance, in the area of national unity, we had serious difficulties. Even after the war, we did not really manage to establish national unity, and therefore national reconciliation was a major concern. And then we also had the development issues, especially not being able to generate enough employment for particularly the younger people. Productive sectors were not really progressing very much. If you look at the industrial development in the country, we saw some degree of stagnation already, especially the diversification of the industrial sector was not taking place. And then of course the agricultural sector, which is really very critical for Sri Lanka, not only from the point of view of food security but also from the point of view of employment in the countryside, was not really making much headway, and so on. So we certainly wanted a government that would really have a very focused approach to dealing with these very, very important issues, and that is exactly what the people expected. So we had a government formed, and I did not really see that kind of a focus. I'll just give an example now. Reconciliation, national reconciliation. I mean, when you really wanted a very focused national effort, what you had was a very scattered situation, with several ministries being established to deal with the same subject, several institutions, new institutions being established, and so on and so forth, that you will not necessarily have a coordinated national effort. I think the same was also true in the other areas as well, but I'll probably touch on these as we move on.
Professor, now it goes without saying that the government currently is in deep crisis. But now, like you said, some of the key matters have not been attended and there is no focus because of a scattered government. But could it also be because there have been multiple cabinet reshuffles ever since the inception of this government?
That's exactly the point. Political instability, I think, is the biggest problem for a country which really needs a very clear focus in development, very clear focus in welfare, and a very clear focus in building national unity. So if you have political instability, volatility, it's really not going to help in any way, especially in a situation where we needed massive investments, foreign direct investment, because in the case of Sri Lanka, we were already indebted both domestically as well as internationally, and therefore capital had to really flow in from outside the country. So you really need a government that would certainly be encouraging, providing all the necessary support for people to come in and invest their capital. And then also, of course, you have to manage your human resources. You cannot really allow people to really migrate to other countries looking for greener pastures, because we are a small country with a very small labor force, let's say just over 8 million, and we just cannot afford to have massive leakage as we have witnessed in this country. Like, for instance, ever since we liberalized the economy, the people have been moving out, and we have at any time in the recent past about 1.6 to 1.8 million people employed outside the country, and many of these people are really with a lot of skills, experience, and so on and so forth, and to have them working abroad might be something that we are happy about, because they are sending remittances, so that we could really use that money to bridge the trade gap and pay for our imports and things like that. But on the other hand, we just can't afford to lose so many talented, so many experienced people, because we want to build our institutions, we want to start new economic ventures, and we want to really also move away from labor intensive to technology intensive production, because our labor is no longer cheap. I mean, as it was the case in 1977 when we liberalized the economy. In fact, at that time, let's say unskilled worker was paid 5 rupees a day. As you can imagine, 5 rupees a day, at that time for unskilled work. But whereas for the same work today, you have to pay at least 1,000 rupees, and in some cases it might be 1,500 rupees. So, but the point is that there is no productivity improvement, but you are paying, the 200%, for the same labor that you have, and we have really a very serious situation with respect to labor, and as many people recognize, this is a major obstacle to let's say attracting foreign investors, because we attracted foreign investors in 1977 by offering cheap labor, which we cannot offer anymore, and as you can see, a lot of our industries have migrated, especially garment industries, have migrated to other countries looking for cheaper labor. And
so now, Professor, how do you think you spoke about FDIs, and how do you think the foreign investors are perceiving Sri Lanka at the moment right now for a potential investment zone?
Well, I think we have to turn to East Asia to understand this problem. In East Asia, they maintain political stability, and they had strong governments, and they also had strong institutions built around the state, and they also had policies which were very clear, and they also had incentives that were quite attractive, and they also invested in very important areas like education and research and development and so on and so forth. So the governments in East Asia were doing everything to create conducive environment for investors to come in and sort of start new business ventures and so on and so forth, whereas in Sri Lanka we have not been able to do that, and as a result we have not been able to really attract the foreign investment that we needed. But of course we also had other problems, especially the war that ravaged the country for nearly 30 years, and that really was a major problem from the point of view of foreign investors, because you expect a certain degree of stability and peace before you move into a country for long-term investment. Of course, short-term investment, yes, you can like come and invest in short-term ventures and so on and so forth, but if you are really thinking in terms of staying in a country in the long run and really do business on a long-term basis, political stability, peace, and various other conditions that I described are very critical.
Well, Professor, we're going to go in for a short commercial break. Stay with Bees First in Focus. We are joined by an emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. You're watching Bees First in Focus, and we are joined by emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. Professor, we left off about the political crisis and how it has impacted other sectors. Now, given the current crisis, how is it affecting the public sector, the public services in the country?
Well, I think there is overall demoralization in society. Certainly, when you look at the way the public institutions are managed today, there is a lot of talk about what is going on in the country rather than concentrate on the work that they have to do. So I think it is important that we overcome this kind of crisis as rapidly as we can. Otherwise, I think we are going to have serious repercussions. I mean, it is absolutely necessary that the leaders really put their heads together and figure out how to really leave this crisis behind, because everything else is being affected by this. I think when you have a government which is not which is not really composed of members from one particular party, when you have members coming from two very different political parties, it is absolutely necessary to have some kind of mediation, some kind of balance being established in order to really create some degree of unity of purpose, and then also working towards certain national goals. I mean, you may not be able to agree on everything when you have different opinions on various issues, but nevertheless you should be able to agree on a minimum program and say that we are going to together pursue these national goals. And I think it is not difficult to really figure out what kind of national goals that we should be pursuing at the present juncture in this country. So I have a feeling that that we really need an umpire, because you can't play any game, game, whether it's cricket or any other game, without an umpire.
Well, but what do you mean by umpire?
Well, I think we have a presidential system of government, and we have also the prime minister elected by the parliament. So you have a situation where you can really have the president to really play that role, to really mediate, and see how best some reconciliation between these two factions of the government could be wrote about. But what is really happening is not that, and I think we do not see the President playing that role. And in fact, if the President played that role from the day one, I think the situation would have been different. If he did not take a side, and if he did not really join one party, and basically remain neutral as much as possible, I think our situation would have been different.
Professor, you also spoke about achieving national goals imposed by the government, of course. Now, this also begs the question, how can these national goals be achieved when the subject ministers are constantly shuffled? Now, like I asked you before as well, there have been multiple cabinet reshuffles, so which essentially means that while this power struggle is going on, these ministries are being headed by the ministry secretary. So what will be the outcome if this situation persists?
Oh, absolutely. I think as you know, 5 years is not a long period. Even if you have a government running for 5 years without changing ministries and so on and so forth, it is still not a long enough period to pursue long-term national goals. But what we have is an entirely different situation where we have constant change, and we do not know exactly when the next reshuffle is going to take place. So this is really a very, very sorry state of affairs, and I don't think that we can afford to have this situation any longer. I cannot understand why very experienced senior members of the government do not understand this, because they have been around, they have been in this business for the last 30, 40, even maybe 50 years. So I mean, they should understand this much better than the average citizen in this country.
So Professor, we are also seeing a lot of important areas in the country in terms of public welfare being neglected. For example, road development, and then we have garbage disposal. So again, we come down to the question, what is happening here? Like you said, the senior members who have been around for the 30, 40, 50 years are in a dire strait, having in the midst of a power struggle, while the actual problems outside, like the rural community, the urban development, all these are being neglected.
So the point is that the state institutions are so critical from any point of view, whether it is development, public welfare, or regulatory. Now the question is whether we have a situation where all our state institutions are functioning effectively. My answer to that question would be no, because these institutions have to be revamped. These, I mean, as you know, we were talking a great deal about politicization of state institutions. I mean, I remember the entire university system was politicized, at a particular point in time, and we were really frustrated within the university system, because we expected the universities to be spared, but even that did not happen in this country. So the point is that politicization has been a major factor adversely affecting our public institutions, and I think we have reduced that to a very great extent, but we still see that happening. For instance, you just when you become a minister, there was a time when you just bring people from your villages and your areas, and you just pack these institutions. I mean, I have seen that in the university, for instance, from time to time. Every time a government changes, we see people from that particular minister's area coming in and taking up various positions. I mean, not necessarily important positions, but nevertheless, and I think this is true for many public institutions. I mean, famous players are the railways and electricity board and so on and so forth. Now, politicization has been a major problem in this country as far as the functioning of public institutions are concerned. Now, that has to be basically stemmed, and that cannot continue. And then, of course, you have to also try and inspire these institutions by appointing people who are really of leadership, of high caliber, who can provide leadership and so on and so forth. I know that some of the institutions can be turned around in no time if you appoint the right people to lead those organizations.
Professor, I'm going to have to interrupt you there for a second. We have to go in for a short commercial break. We are joined by Professor Sirihettige, an emeritus professor at the University of Colombo. Stay with Biz First in Focus. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. This is Biz First in Focus, and we are joined by Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Sirihettige, and we're talking about essentially the current situation in the country, the political, economic, so on and so forth. Professor, before we went in for the break, you were highly advocating for the public institutions in the country to be revamped, and you said it takes just a matter of 2 weeks. Now the question is it practical, more or less? Is it possible? Because we may or may not have an election in the next 1.5 years or 2 years. So is it possible to make such a big revamp in this time frame?
Now, when I say that we can, revamp these institutions, I didn't mean that we could do it, within a short period. It will take quite some time before we can really turn these organizations around. But what I meant was that to really come up with a strategic plan, for each one of these organizations is not going to take too much time. That's what I said. Once you come up with a strategic plan, which is not going to take too much time, which you can do in a week or so, then you have to work according to the strategic plan that you have worked out. So that's what I mean. But on the other hand, whether it is short term or long term, public institutions have to be strengthened. Public institutions have to be revamped. Otherwise, what can happen is that people are really not going to be able to benefit from these institutions. I mean, for instance, if people have to really, go behind individuals and like bribe and things like that. And for instance, the institutions that are playing a regulatory function are very critical. I mean, for instance, if you take the institutions that give various permits, building permits, clearance certificates and so on and so forth, and they have to be really very, very effective. And I think they should be run very, very smoothly. People should be able to get these things done rapidly. So, if, for instance, if you want to get a building permit, I mean, you should know how long it's going to take, and what it takes to get your certificate and so on and so forth. So I think that kind of predictability, I think, is very, very critical. I think you talked about foreign investors. I mean, foreign investors have been complaining a great deal about regulatory bodies in this country. These institutions not being effective, not being very efficient, not being very helpful, and so on and so forth. I think these are the experience of the citizens in this country in general. Not just the people who want to do business.
Well, Professor, we've had like a couple of sessions of rain. It is these kind of intermittent rains that could have an outbreak of dengue once again. So coming back to the question of public institutions acting upon it. Now we've had this situation from year in and year out. Every time of the year we have a dengue outbreak, and it's more often than not it's always reactive, not proactive. So how do you think this public institution should work on being more proactive than what they are right now?
Well, I think we have a three-tier system of government. We have the central government, the provincial government, and then we also have local council. But what is lacking is the division of labor. In fact, if you go by the laws that guide the institutions, like for instance the Pradesh Act, the municipalities ordinance, and so on and so forth, it is quite clear what these institutions are supposed to do. But what has happened over the years is that this division of labor that should have been maintained across these three tiers has been basically ignored, and you have had a situation where the central government, central government actors, the ministers and even prime ministers and the presidents, basically sort of going right down to the local level and meddling with the activities of the local bodies. Like for instance, we have had a situation where minor roads are being repaired, and here the function has not been really delegated to the local councils, and you have name boards being put up, with the president and the prime minister, appearing, in these very, tiny, communities, where they have repaired a road or maybe a culvert or whatever. I mean, that degree of
propaganda,
that degree of confusion in the minds of the people, who is responsible for what. I mean, it is quite clear that the public health is the responsibility of local councils. Local councils are supposed to maintain the local infrastructure, whether they are drains or culverts or whatever. And then building regulations are very much in the hands of these institutions. I mean, they are the people who are supposed to give permits, building permits, and basically regulate who is building what, where and how. But I think there has been quite a lot of confusion in this area, and as a result we have not been able to really get the institutions at the local level to take care of their responsibilities. I think if we can re-establish division of labor between the local, the provincial and the central, I think we would be able to achieve a great deal. So I think if we can really get the public institutions to do what they are supposed to do, according to their mandate, I think we will be able to really address a lot of the issues that we are confronted with in this country. Unless and until we do that, I think we will be basically in this very confused state.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Professor Siri Hettige, for joining us on the program today. We have to wrap up. That was Biz First in Focus, and we are joined by Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige, who essentially said that public institutions should be less politicized and a revamp is a must. So we will wait and see what happens. This has been Biz First in Focus. I'm Shahan Jarapati. Good night.